go and get started. My name's Dan from Dan's Test Prep. This is Tutor Tuesday, and today I've got some digital SAT questions for you guys to practice on. So let's get right into it. I've got a row of math questions here, followed by reading, followed by math again, and then some slots for you guys to submit your own questions. So I have about 2 or 3 spots open for questions. The questions are all from the digital SAT and they're sort of just randomly assorted, so we'll go through all sorts of different topics today. This first one looks like a little stats question. It says Tom scored 85, 78, and 98 on his first 3 exams in history class, solving which inequality gives the score G on Tom's 4th exam that will result in a mean score of at least 90. Okay, so mean score of at least 90. That means we want the mean. Let's just start translating this into math, from words to math. The mean has to be greater than or equal to 90. And then what is the mean? Well, the mean is the sum of all the items divided by the number of items. We want that to be greater than or equal to 90. Well, number of items is 4. The sum of all the items should be, let me write it like this. We have 85, we have 78, we have 98, and we have a 4th score, which is G. It's kind of an unknown. We can divide that by the 4 items, and that's greater than or equal to 90. That looks like it pretty much just matches up with answer choice C, so that's the one that we'll go with. Not too bad. Our next question here says, the given equation relates the distinct positive numbers p, k, and j. Which equation correctly expresses 4j plus 9 in terms of p and k? Okay, so whenever I see some quantity like 4j plus 9, and I see the words in terms of, that means I want to isolate this quantity. In this case, you can see it's combined with a k. It's kind of in a divisor right there. So what I would probably want to do is just multiply 4j plus 9 onto both sides. Right? If I have p equals k divided by 4j plus 9, what I could do here is multiply both sides by 4j plus 9. Because you can see that would cancel out the denominator. So what I get is 4j plus 9 times p is equal to k. Now the last thing you want to do to isolate this 4j plus 9 is literally just divide by p. Because you see that will cancel out the p on the left side. So finally we're left with 4j plus 9 is equal to k over p. And that should be answer choice A. Not too bad. Okay, this next one I'm sure many of you can do. Actually, if you get it faster than me, you can put the answer in the chat. But one thing I like to do, I see it's giving us some kind of equation. It's asking what is the value of x minus 5. I also notice x minus 5 is already built into the equation. So a lot of people, what they do is they solve for x first, and then they plug in x into x minus 5. Or maybe they just forget to plug in x at all, and then they pick one of the trap answers. What I'll do here is instead of expanding everything out and distributing my terms, what I actually want to do is combine them. So 2x minus 5 plus 3x minus 5 is 5x minus 5 equal to 10. When I'm at this point, I can divide everything by 5, and I can directly get the answer, which is x minus 5 is equal to 2. That would be answer choice A. If you did it the long way, you kind of I mean, it's not that many more steps, but you kind of run the risk of accidentally choosing the value of x instead of x minus 5. And here it's just much more direct and straightforward to get it this way. And our last one for this math row is a volume problem. So you guys again can put your answers in if you can solve it quicker. But this one says we have a cube of length 68 inches. So let's draw our little cube here. Or I guess it's kind of a big cube. A solid sphere with a radius of 34 inches is inside of the cube. So the sphere kind of, oh, I don't know if I can draw that real well. But the sphere is inside here. It has a radius of 34 inches, such that the sphere touches the center of each face of the cube. To the nearest cubic inch, what is the volume of the space in the cube not taken up by the sphere? We want to find out basically this orange shaded region. It's kind of the corners where the sphere doesn't quite catch up to the cube. That empty space. So to find an empty space here, what we can just do quite simply is take the volume of the cube and subtract the volume of the sphere. And I think these formulas are even given to you on the digital SAT reference sheet that you can pull up. So the volume of a cube is going to be the side length cubed, and the volume of a sphere is going to be 4/3 pi r cubed. So that's 68 cubed minus 4/3 pi times 34 cubed. I won't do all the intermediate steps. At this point, you can plug it into your calculator or even plug it into Desmos, but you would get something like 149,796 approximately. And that looks to be answer choice A. How are we feeling so far? You guys ready for some reading writing practice? Let's move on to those questions. Okay, this one looks like a words in context question. I can already tell just by the question stem right here. It's asking how can we fill in the blank with the best word or phrase. So let's see what they're actually saying here, the context. Diego Velázquez was the leading artist in the court of King Philip IV of Spain during the 17th century, but his influence was hardly blank Spain. Realist and impressionist painters all around the world, employed his techniques and echoed elements of his style. So I see Spain mentioned here, and then I see kind of a contrast. It's not just limited to Spain, it's seen all around the world. So if we do something like derived from means it came from that place. It seems like this guy did come from Spain, so we don't want to say it was hardly derived from Spain. Recognized in Spain? Well, no, it wasn't. It couldn't be hardly recognized in Spain if he was the leading artist. Hardly confined to Spain, that could make sense. It was hardly confined to Spain. It was actually seen all around the world. And hardly repressed by Spain, that doesn't really make sense either. I don't see anything that indicates that Spain would be repressing his influence. Okay, next one is a kind of a new format that you see in digital SAT. We are given some students' notes, and we're asked to do something with those notes. So it says the student wants to introduce the novel The Holder of the World to an audience already familiar with this author. Which choice most effectively uses relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Well, the first choice, Bharati Mukherjee's settings include both 20th century United States and 17th century India. It doesn't introduce the novel, right? The goal here is to introduce a novel. This does not introduce the novel. B says in addition to her novel, The Holder of the World. That does not introduce the novel. That is moving away from the novel. C says Bharati Mukherjee's novel, The Holder of the World, centers around two women, one living in 20th century United States and the other in 17th century India. That makes sense. We don't explain anything about the author because the audience is already familiar with the author. Instead, we just introduce the novel and what it's about. Um, and D doesn't really introduce the novel very well either. Okay, next one is asking about the main idea of a text. Main idea of a text. Let's see. Believing that living in an impractical space can heighten awareness and even improve health. Conceptual artist Madeline Jins and Shusaka Arakawa designed an apartment building in Japan to be more fanciful than functional. A kitchen counter is chest high on one side and knee high on the other. A ceiling has a door to nowhere. So more fanciful than functional. The effect is disorienting but invigorating. After 4 years there, filmmaker Nobu Yamaoka reported significant health benefits. Seems to line up with what we saw earlier in the passage. So this one's saying that although this fanciful features can be rejuvenating, it's unsustainable. That doesn't really seem like what the text is saying. I mean, a person lived there for 4 years. Designing disorienting spaces is the most effective way to create a physically stimulating environment. I don't see anything about physically stimulating. I see about heightening awareness, but that's not the same thing. As a filmmaker, Yamaoka has long supported the designs of these conceptual artists. I don't see anything in the passage that indicates that. We can't really make an inference about that. D is our last answer choice, so we're going to go with D. Although impractical, the design of the apartment building by Jins and Arakawa may improve the well-being of the building's residents. That makes sense, right? The effect is invigorating, and after 4 years, you can see significant health benefits. So it definitely can improve the well-being of the residents. Okay, we've got one more reading question in the lineup. We're asked to complete the text with the most logical transition words. Let's see what it's saying before the transition and after. Saying Alexander Lawrence Posey varied his focus and his tone depending on the genre in which he was writing. In his poetry, he used heartfelt language to evoke the beauty and peacefulness of his natural surroundings. In journalism, blank, he employed humor and satire to comment on political issues affecting his Muskogee Creek community. It seems like there's a difference in, heartfelt language, which evokes beauty, versus something like humor and satire to comment on political issues. Those are two very different things. And so what I would do is pick something that gives us a contrasting word. The only thing I really see is by contrast. That is, it kind of follows on what was previously said, granted, and similarly. Same thing, those are all too much of like a continuation or a similarity, where we really want a contrasting word. Alright, I have another set of math questions for you guys. This one actually is an interesting one. Let's do this with Desmos, since we can do that with the digital SAT now. I want to show you guys how useful it can be. So it's asking us which ordered pair is a solution to the system of equations above. One way that you can solve this is, like for example, what I would do is set the top equation in terms of y, so y equals x minus 1, and the bottom equation will be y equals x squared minus x minus 3, if we just isolate the y's. What we can do from here is set those two equations equal to each other to see where they intersect. So x minus 1 equals x squared minus x minus 3. Then you would have to solve this out. So you'd probably do something like x squared minus 2x minus 2 equals 0. And then you can solve with using the quadratic equation, or probably like completing the squares. Completing the square. Actually, completing the square would be a pretty easy way to do it. But let's say you didn't know all that, you didn't want to do all that math. You can go into Desmos, you can plug in the equations as they are. You don't even have to solve for them in terms of y. And then you can see the points of intersection right here. If you know that the square root of 3 is around 1.732, you can kind of already see where the answers are going. You can see a point of intersection with y equals the square root of 3. But let's say you didn't know that. You could even still plug in all the answer choices. Like I could make a point A comma B. I could make the x coordinate as 1 plus square root 3, the y coordinate as square root 3. And you don't have to do it like this. You can also just plug it in as an ordered pair like so. You can see definitely this is a point of intersection. And that matches up with answer choice A. So Desmos is just a very quick way to plug things in without having to really solve them and just visualize the solutions. You could plug in these points as well and see none of them work. None of them will give you the right answer. Okay, next one is a function transformations question. Honestly, this one's not too bad. Let's go through it. The function f is defined by f of x equals 7x cubed. In the xy plane, the graph of y equals g of x is the result of shifting the graph of y equals f of x down 2 units. So what defines g? Well, a shift down 2 units can be represented as a shift in the y down 2. So if y minus 2. So if y equals f of x, g of x is just y minus 2, or f of x minus 2. Or substituting in the actual definition for f of x, that would just be 7x cubed minus 2, which is answer choice D. Not really too much math over there. You just have to know how your different transformations affect your equation. Okay, so this type of problem is a statistics type problem, scatter plot. We're asked to find what is the best model for the data in the scatter plot. And there's a few key things we can look for here. One of them is if the equation is quadratic. Looks like all of them are, so we don't really have much to go off there. Other thing is to look at things like the leading coefficients and the y-intercept. Like here, I noticed that the y-intercept equals to 20 for this graph. Y-intercept equals 20. Well, there's only one equation I see that has the same thing. That's going to be answer choice B, right? The plus 20 here. And if you didn't know that, you could also plug in a point, right? Like this point is represented by 0, 20. So x is equal to 0, y is equal to 20. Otherwise, you don't even need to look at other parts because there's only one choice with the y-intercept of 20. If there were multiple, then you could start plugging in different points to see if those equations still hold true. Okay, and I have another probability question for you guys. A bag contains 60 marbles. A marble is to be chosen at random. If the probability that the blue marble will be chosen is 0.35, how many marbles in the bag are blue? That's not too bad as well. The probability that blue marble will be chosen is 0.35. Let's see. So probability is just, or the way I would think of probability is, yeah, I see an answer in a chat. That's correct. Probability is the number of wanted outcomes over the number of possible outcomes. And that gives you a 0 to 1 or 0 to 100%. 0 to 1 number that represents 0 being impossible, 1 being completely likely. In this case, the number of wanted outcomes is unknown. So we could just say like x. The number of possible outcomes, well, we could choose any of the 60 marbles if we're choosing at random. And the outcome, or the probability that we choose one of the marbles we want, the blue marbles, is going to be 0.35, 35% chance. So really all you have to do here is just multiply both sides by 60, and you'll very quickly be able to get x is equal to 21. Let's see, I have space for 2 more questions if someone wants to submit, in addition to this one that I'm going to go over here. This one's kind of tricky. This is a table that gives a number of hours, h, of labor, and a plumber's total charge, f of h, in dollars, for 2 different jobs. There's a linear relationship between h and f of h. Which equation represents this relationship? Well, for a linear relationship, we need 2 things, and that's the slope, and we need the y-intercept. The slope we can pretty easily find by taking 2 data points and subtracting the y values divided by that change in x. Slope can be represented in many ways, but in this case, the most useful representation for us is change in y over change in x. So 285 minus 155 is 130, divided by 2, gives us a slope of 65. Well, that only matches up with answer choice C. You can also check the y-intercept. The y-intercept is when h is equal to 0. And if we don't really have that data point in our table, but if we work backwards, we go back 1, then due to our slope of 65, the 155 would become 90. Okay, let's do another math question. I try to find a more interesting or difficult one. Okay, here's one on unit conversions. A certain park has an area of 11,863,808 square yards. What is the area in square miles of this park? 1 mile is 1,760 yards. It would be a bit of a mistake to just take 11,863,808 and divide this by 1760. So what does that equal? 11,863,808 divided by 1760. That would be about 6,740.8. This is not correct. Because it's square units, square miles and square yards, so there's a length and a width here. If we convert the square, or it'll make more sense if I write the units out. So we have 11,863,808 yards squared. What we did is basically multiply by a conversion of 1 mile for every 1,760 yards. But you can see that doesn't really cancel out the yards squared here. Yards squared divided by yards times miles. So what you'd want to do is multiply by this conversion factor twice, or I guess the conversion factor squared. Now you can see yards squared will cancel out with the yards squared here, and we'll get a resultant unit of miles squared. So in all, this is going to be 3.83 miles squared. It's a much different answer than 6,740. And we've got time for one more math question here. So let's do this one. Nice little circles and squares. What is the length of one side of a square that has the same area as a circle with radius 2? So the circle has a radius of 2. The areas are equal. Well, if I know the areas are equal, that makes it a lot simpler because then I can say the area of the square, which is side length squared, is equal to pi r squared. And we already know the radius as well, right? Radius is 2. So s squared is equal to pi times 2 squared. The only thing we have to be careful about now is just being able to square root this properly. So when I do this operation, I should get s, and here 2 squared under the square root will just become 2, and pi under the square root will become square root of pi. So it should really look something like 2 root pi, which is going to be answer choice C. Alright, that's all the questions I've got for you guys. This will be posted, a recording on my YouTube. In the meantime, you can check out my explore.dancetestprep.com page for more tips and my newsletter and everything. And I'll see you guys next week.